Hi, this is Gladius. I will present some small details and nuances of Kafka you might have missed. These findings are accumulated over almost 100 hours of gameplay, and without further ado, let's get into it. Now, enemy targets can have many shock DOTs on them, as long as they're from different sources. So for Kafka, the ultimate shock shares the same source as her talent follow-up attack proc, so they cannot coexist and will overwrite each other on application. So think of her talent as a way to consistently apply her ultimate shock, but not a way to double dip. That would be overpowered. Another significant shock DOT is if a lightning character on the team breaks the enemy toughness, especially when they have a high amount of break effect stat. Kafka's light cone can also apply another source of shock DOT and is around 20% the potency of a level 10 ultimate shock. When Kafka breaks any target with her ultimate or skill, the DOT detonation happens at the end. This means that any shock DOT that results from such break will be included in the pool of DOT detonated by the ability. Now, the second detail I found out about Kafka's ultimate is that it applies the shock DOT first before the DOT detonation. So do not feel the need to have to apply her shock first through other means before casting her ultimate. Now, the third detail is that her skill is a blast radius ability, means that it hits the main target and adjacent side targets with a maximum of 3 targets being hit. You usually find these type of targeting with destruction units. But note, she only detonates all DOT damage on the main target and not the side units. During your target selection, this is animated with a spider web on top of the enemy's head. Also note, there's also an overlapping water drop animation that indicates if the enemy target have any DOT statuses on them. This is a simple yes or no indicator and does not specify if a target has more than one. If the target has no DOT, the water drop symbol will be absent. Detail number 4 about Kafka, the purple spinning icon beside her unit frame indicates that her talent is available to be activated upon any teammate using their basic attack to apply her shock. After it successfully activates, it is then grayed out with an hourglass and the number 1. It just means you have to wait until the end of her next turn for it to become available for use again. If Kafka is crowd controlled, the talent will not activate even if it is available. Number 5, I want to point out that all DOT statuses does their damage at the beginning of an enemy's turn for a set number of turns. Any DOT detonation provided by Kafka are bonus damage and does not expend any turns of the DOT. Any slow effects or pushback mechanics, such as entanglement and imprisonment, will slow down the rate enemies take DOT damage naturally. One interesting fact is that the frozen effect actually speeds up DOT damage, not slowing it down. How frozen works is that when the target is frozen, they're unable to take their next action, but it still counts as a turn for all their buffs and debuffs. And then their following action is being pushed forward by 50%. So essentially, in a short time span of roughly 1.5 turns, they're actually taking 2 whole turns, increasing the frequency of DOT damage triggered naturally. This could be a bad thing for debuffs you want to stick on enemies, such as defense or resistance down. But in case of DOT debuffs, enemies are actually taking more damage more frequently, resulting in a higher DPS. Number 6, her technique. It is very strong. It applies the big shock multiplier of Kafka's ultimate before entering battle. So when Kafka takes her first action, she can safely use her skill on any enemy target without worrying about applying a shock beforehand. With all enemies affected by this, they actually start taking the shock damage immediately on their first turn, and this can absolutely destroy the first wave of enemies. This technique has such a huge radius, it can affect more than one group of enemies, with the first wave of each group entering the battle with her shock already on them. Detail number 7 about Kafka is that with the help of her traces of giving 18% effect hit rate and 30% increase in the base hit chance of her ultimate and talent, she only requires 10 extra effect hit from other sources to guarantee her dot application from the ultimate and talent. On another note, the signature light cone only applies its shock at a 100% base chance, but it procs on hit instances and not skill activation. As an example, her talent follow-up attack has a 5 hit instances, and this grants the light cone 5 separate chances to apply its shock. Thus, effect hit chance is still not needed for the signature light cone. Her Eidolon 1 works the same way as the ultimate in talent, where it procs on activation and not hit instances, so it only has one chance per turn to apply, so it can be argued to build a little more effect hit on Kafka just for her Eidolon 1. But I personally would not go overboard trying to guarantee this. I think 30 to 40% is more than enough. Point number 8, I want to make it about how important it is to have speed on Kafka. Especially how important it is to have 134 speed above all else. MOC is currently the hardest content in the game and it follows a cycle system. 134 speed is the exact amount required to grant a character 2 actions in the very first cycle when entering battle. But not only that, it also applies to every subsequent cycles when one wave of enemy is fully cleared and a new wave spawns. When a new wave of enemy spawns, all characters' turn order and movement value resets back to its starting state no matter how many actions they took in the previous enemy wave. In other words, a majority of actions taken by the team follows this first cycle state. But keep in mind, all buffs and debuffs to speed retained from previous actions may affect next wave's turn order. I highly recommend every character on the team to have at least 134 speed to take advantage of this rule. Now let's talk about beyond 134 speed. How much DPS can speed actually give you? In damage calculation, speed is by far her best stat to go for, both in terms of Kafka's personal damage and team damage. That being said, this is just theoretical damage on a spreadsheet. Being a team-oriented turn-based combat game, team strategy is more important. Speed alters every teammate's order of operation, so you must take this into account when building speed stat on Kafka and her teammates. Kafka at bare minimum wants one teammate to be faster than her to trigger her talent, preferably a Harmony or Abundance character for the best value. On top of that, if you're running a DOT damage dealer, you want them to go faster than Kafka as well to set up the DOT debuffs before she takes action. In most cases, almost all her best teammates wants to go before Kafka. The one big exception is a Bronya Kafka hypercarry team, where you want Bronya to just be slightly slower than Kafka while both staying above 134 speed. This ensures that Bronya can reliably make Kafka take 2 actions instead of 1. Following the 1 cycle rule, this equates to Kafka taking 4 actions in the first cycle of MOC. So you can see, even if speed is the best stat for her damage per second, it still puts a lot of pressure on the whole team to build even more stat to go faster than her. If her teammates are unable to reach such a high speed stat, she will then have to in turn limit her own speed to accommodate. Number 9, real quick, I'll go over survivability. Kafka's team building is very offensive, with very little room to slot more than one defensive or sustained character on the team. Oftentimes you'll lack a tanky character with a high taunt value. As a result, every character on the team has a good chance of being hit, and it doesn't take long for somebody to be unlucky enough to get hit twice or 3 times in a row, then dies. So don't underestimate those HP percent and defense percent substats. A little might go a long way. Alright, number 10, this brings me to the last point, team building. Kafka's teammate options currently have 2 main ideologies. First one being a hypercarry Kafka. If most enemies are actually weak to lightning, it is completely viable to play a solo damage team comp with Kafka as the damage dealer, along with 2 damage boosting supports, be it Harmony or Nihility. The dot multiplier she brings herself is very significant and is sufficient enough for her to be the solo carry for a team. In this case, it's super important to level her ultimate to 10. She have the best scaling per level up on her ultimate compared to any other character in the game, around 13% per level. Her main shock multiplier is tied to this ultimate level and is the core of all her personal damage. Now, the other main Kafka team setup right now is the more traditional 1 dot DPS and a booster setup. This setup is especially useful if the boss enemy is not weak to lightning. She will then definitely want another DPS on the team that can break toughness and assist her in applying DOT and break effect. Notable options currently are Sampo, Luca, and Xuan. In the current meta though, there's an ample amount of enemies weak to lightning, so hypercarry Kafka is performing really close with the dot team setup. But I have no doubt in my mind in the future when they do release new 5-star DOT damage dealers, the DOT team setup will pull ahead of the Kafka hypercarry team setup. This actually gives me great confidence in Kafka's future potential as well. She enables the dot archetype playstyle by taking the role of the team's mastermind. DOT no longer just do damage when enemies take their turn, but also when Kafka takes her turn. KAFKA completely changed the way we play with DOT damage and how we can utilize Toughness Break to its full potential. She opened the gate to a whole new way of playing the game. These information are compiled over 100 hours of gameplay and analyzed with a fine-tooth comb. If you at least learned a thing or two, I'd appreciate it if you dropped a sub and a like. Expect more content like this for future characters. And this is Gladius, signing out.